Hi guys, we're here with John Cheney-Lippold, professor from
University of Michigan.
University of Michigan. We're here in Lucia Lounge. Thanks for Lucia for hosting us. Professor John is an expert. He wrote also a book, We Are Data. He will explain more. He'll tell us more about the book.
Do you want to sit down?
Okay,
Right.
Okay, first of all, John.
Yes.
Who are you?
Who am I? With my life.
Life, your studies.
I grew up in Iowa, in the middle of the country, in farmland, and I went to school in Washington, D.C. to do politics, and I realized the more interesting questions about communication, about how people relate to each other, the power that is implicit in that. I went to graduate school in University of Southern California, and now I'm a professor of American Studies and Digital Culture at the University of Michigan, where we're doing really interesting stuff because a lot of the work that we're thinking of is not just thinking about tech, but thinking about social and cultural commentary, the politics and power embedded in it, the manipulative potentiality of a lot of tech. So to say, I'm a nerd, I grew up being a computer,
All our fans are nerds.
That's all, yeah. So being I grew up being a nerd, and so
it's cool now to be a nerd.
That's the thing, and it's such a weird thing that people are like tech. I remember thinking about this. It's like 15 years ago. No, more than that. My friends were making fun of me for liking computers, and I'm like, everyone is on the computer now. How is it that shift happened? And obviously we know why, but I'm very interested in the way that computers can both liberate us, but also can control us. Yeah. There's a very useful phrase that I really like from a guy named Melvin Kranzberg who says, technology is neither good, nor is it bad, nor is it neutral. It's how you use it. It's the politics behind it. So for me, I'm really interested in thinking about, that.
Let's welcome some of our friends. George Gagis, I was watching, Andonis. Hi Andonis, hi George.
Gracias.
If you have any question, just drop it in the comment. Hi Panayotis, Cosmas. You might know Panayotis is in the Cyprus Club. You might be in there. By the way, let's say John is here for an event tomorrow. The event starts, it will be in the Cyprus University. He will present his book, and they will have also discussion about Q&A about data, politics. Hi also Panayotis Zafiris. Zafiris also is professor. He's in the Notre. And hi Panayotis. If you have any questions, guys, drop them in the comments, and we'll love to answer them. Okay, let's. Your research. What are your research about algorithms, data?
Yeah. My initial research questions were about how algorithms have the ability to control us, but more importantly, to redefine who we are. I'm very interested in questions of again, the power, but more importantly, thinking about how new digital forms produce new kinds of power, new relationships of power. That, for example, this relationship we have with the camera would have been unimaginable 10 years ago. And it's not a good or bad relationship, it's just a relation. We can talk to people, people can talk to us, but with communication always comes power, with communication always comes responsibility and ethics, and expectation, more important than anything.
Let's elaborate more about what you have said, the new relations that digital created.
Yeah, well, we were talking earlier, and I really like the question of, the subtitle of the book is Algorithms in the Making of Our Digital Selves.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's really interesting because, as you very well point, we're not digital, like very analog, you're analog. But the interesting and important thing is to make anything digital, you have to recreate it. In order to make a world in terms of a camera digital, in order to make us digital, it has to convert ourselves into ones and zeros. So that's a very kind of ontological question of, are we atoms or are we bytes and bits?
Well, atoms or are we water? HTO.
Yeah, well, that
not
too.
Even HTO, it's a binary.
Yeah, well, it's a binary, but how does the analog become digital? And we can understand it in the kind of atoms, electrons, protons form, or we can understand it in terms of, eventually when you scroll into a photo, you get to pixels, you get to the base. And those base things, unlike the real world, you cannot go into the atom from what we understand right now. You can't go, and there's things that are microscopic and even further smaller. More important than that, cultural forms. Questions of who is a citizen, questions of who deserves X versus who does not deserve X, questions of gender, questions of class, questions of what it means to be an American. These things, when they're made into a digital form, are defined. They're literally constructed. Somebody had to write an algorithm for it. Somebody has used training data to create that idea. So when we think of artificial intelligence, we think of machine learning, we think of algorithms themselves. They don't just magically appear or perfectly mimic the real world. They are produced with the very explicit politics of trying to get the most accurate output, but often that accurate output isn't necessarily the output that I want or that you want. A good example of this is the NSA has an algorithm that determines if you're a citizen of the US or not. It has nothing to do with if you're a citizen, because it doesn't take your passport into consideration, because online you don't show your passport, you don't show your identity. What it does is it recreates the notion of citizen through, do you speak English? Does your IP address ping here? Do you talk to people outside of the US or do you talk to people inside the US? Yeah. It's crazy, but the idea is you have to reconstruct the citizen to make it algorithmically understandable. You can't just say, where's your passport, because we don't show our passports.
So if you don't want to be tracked by anybody, then don't have accounts.
Well, that's it, yeah. But even if you don't have an account, there's somebody's watching this.
Here I'm going to make you the questions, because I tried to find some of your LinkedIn, I didn't find anything. Okay, you are projecting, you are making research about digital selves. Yeah. But you're not
I don't have a digital self. Yeah. No, it's a good question. For me,
okay, you know more than us in the subject, so maybe
Well, I would argue it's less about. I think because I know, I realize that there's no out. And this is in the U.S. Like, even if you don't have an account of any social media provider, your GPS on your phone is still sold, no matter. So to have a phone, you're sold.
Yeah, and actually I believe GPS and location can do more harm than even having an account.
Yeah, and there's amazing things you can do with GPS in terms of traffic patterns, in terms of,
Especially what you have seen about the Analytica scandal.
In Cambridge Analytica, yeah.
Everything was tracking by your GPS mostly, not by if you have an account or not.
Precisely, because you think about that, you can have 6 different Facebook accounts. It's possible. You can only have one GPS body that moves around. And so you try to create a unique identifier. You try to create some sort of singular sense of who you are. You don't have a name, because we don't know your full name. You don't have a social security number, because not all people have social security numbers or passport identification. It's GPS. That's the thing. Or the IMEI, or the unique things that phones are about.
Yeah,
it says this phone's different than that.
The unique tracking that has every phone.
Yeah. But to answer your question, though, I actually don't have social media, not because of that, because I do think that everything's tracked. So to have a social media actually kind of takes control over that. I'm more interested in, there's all this research that says, and this is not to necessarily shun Facebook, but using Facebook a lot often increases levels of depression or anxiety. Because you're seeing everybody's best self, you're seeing people be, promoting themselves. You're not.
Yeah, it's a truth.
Yeah,
it's true that I can verify for myself.
Yeah, it's just
sometimes I can find myself because in Facebook, where all my job is presented via Facebook, because my audience is there as a blogger.
Precisely.
So you can, I know that I can confirm.
Yeah, and I think it's increasing. When you go out into the street, you similarly have a relationship to the outside that is making you feel good or bad. It's just in the digital.
Same. It's a social. When you socialize, even a company of 10 people, you can see things that are already happening in a bigger scale in Facebook.
Exactly.
So it's all about social. If you don't accept that.
Yeah, and also how then technology can use that social requisite thing. All social relationships have expectations attached to them, but yeah, Facebook, a thumbs up, commenting, the way that they try to enhance interaction, because if you're staying on the site longer, it makes more money for you.
And here, that's a dystopia that actually Google, Facebook, and all that is created.
And also now,
actually, a lot of them are trying now to live from that.
Precisely.
To give more quality and have a subscription model and give more quality service.
And also, the guy who created the like button, he now is hating the like button, is trying to create a ethical tech world. Yeah.
Okay, let's blockchain.
Blockchain, yeah.
Okay, we talk about it before we start. How all this can, maybe blockchain can fix some stuff of this.
Yeah, I'm suspicious at the level.
The technology, I'm not discussing about the coins.
Yeah. I think it's a perfect ideal. I think it's one of those things that, like the internet, we were talking about this before, the internet was ostensibly a decentralized medium. There's through DNS and IP, there's ways that can restrict what you can and cannot do, but nonetheless, it was supposed to be pseudo-anonymous, it was supposed to be dispersed, fragmented. I find blockchain having great promise, but I do think that, there's a lot of histories of, how technology can be used very quickly by people who want to manipulate it. I don't want to ever say the technology is good, thus it's going to be great. I want to say the technology is good, how can you make it better with good people, with good institutional support, with good cultural assumptions, with good social responsibilities, with regulation if it needs to be, or at least community involvement. So I think there's a lot of really interesting people working on this to help us think through what are the real ways that these things can happen.
Yeah, and the community because when viral is, the community is getting bigger and bigger. People that most of the people they enter because of Bitcoin and because of the currency and the trading stuff, but they want to learn more about the technology. They understand that there's a technology behind it. They try to learn how the technology works in order maybe manipulate it because they want to make money. But
well,
the community is getting bigger the last 2 years.
Yeah, globally, and it's a technological question. How do you make sure that? How do you reify a decentralized world? And you can't without some sort of external thing. So they're trying to do it through algorithms. You could do it through a third party. You could do it through an algorithm. You could do it through a state. Those are kind of prima facie questions of how we understand social relationships. But I challenge everybody to think of how you can make it more just, but also how you can bring other people into the bear so you're not just relying on the technology. Because I relied on TCP/IP, and then all of a sudden you find out, you can create a cookie that tracks everybody. So no matter what happens, you're still tracked. So, but also you think, and I'm just keep on going, man. Like Tim Berners-Lee doing all of his stuff and now being very, very sensitive of the privacy concerns, or Vint Cerf doing TCP/IP, being very cognizant, even though he works at Google, being very cognizant of that there's ways that these technologies can be maladapted. And I think the same thing happens with machine learning. I think that Larry Page said, if he was able to mine healthcare data, Google was, they would be able to save 100,000 lives a year. And that makes sense. You could create, you could find correlations between drugs that were really problematic. They weren't hidden, or somebody isn't washing their hands in one hospital, it would become apparent if people die in a hospital. But very, very interesting things can be done with this. But now there's always a prospect that, Google will make money off of it, or it won't be used for the productive public-facing good that these technologies have available to them. And so, if there's anything that I care about, it's technology, but also social community control of the technology. So if we can do that, that's great.
So technology, disruption, what will be about disruption, changing things completely, creating new markets? Where disrupt Cyprus?
Yeah. Disruption.
I think it's good, bad.
I think it's both.
But I believe... I personally see the disruption by the positive side, that you can democratize a lot of people, you can give a service to a lot more people by creating this more disruptive model.
Yeah. I think in one level, I think that what technologies have done, recent digital technologies have done, have given communities extraordinary power, individuals like you to have extraordinary power to broadcast your ideas. You don't have to go through a gatekeeper, a mediator. You see legacy media having huge issues, figuring out how to get a business model, but more importantly...
Legacy media, they have a huge issue on monetization.
Yeah.
And actually, there is a Google News initiative that they provide funding every quarter for innovative solutions. The fifth call was about monetizing the media. Because, it's very difficult also for individual creators to monetize their job, etc.
Yes, so
their creativity,
but at the other side, you think of, Facebook disrupted how we understand sociality. Facebook disrupted how we understand communities. Facebook disrupted how we understand, even the ideal of the internet was that you could talk to anybody. And I remember growing up, being a nerd, that I had a friend when I was 12 years old who was a French programmer who taught me a lot about programming. And it was this kind of ability to not care about age, not care about nationality or even language. It was over where is it? Over chess, I think. I played chess on the international chess community back in the 90s. I think it was chess. But nonetheless, you see that, but then you see disruption, and then you have, these really good openings, possibilities, which I completely like. But then I realized, Facebook now is having to pull back. It's not its disruption, but it's having to figure out, well, when disruption happens, who's responsible for what happens next?
Yeah, because when disruption happens, also other people, they can take the disruptive technology, as you said, manipulate it.
Yeah.
Even Uber, now it's leaving from countries because of different other stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think Uber is a great example for that.
Okay, let's talk a bit about your... Okay, my wife just logged in, Maria Marquez, Maria, and some other friends, Christine Mandoani. Your book.
Yeah.
Tell us more about the book. What is about? Someone goes to Amazon. I will put the link afterwards in the comment section. Yeah.
The book is called We Are Data, Algorithms and the Making of Our Digital Selves. The argument, in short, is in order to make the world in a digital form, you have to recreate it. And so the citizenship of the NSA is one example. You can't rely on passports, you can't rely on birth certificates, you have to rely on a data-driven algorithmic interpretation that is often 100% farcically wrong, but nonetheless is an empowered truth. Like, they use that to determine who has the right to privacy, they determine who has the right to the rights afforded by citizenship. But in the same forum, we see questions of who is a terrorist. So in South Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, Iraq, that the U.S. switched from a target-based way of killing people through drone, which is I see that person at that cafe and then the drone happens, to a signature strike, to having the data looks like it's a terrorist. And obviously that led to really catastrophic results, but more importantly, it's the recreation of terrorists has the ability to classify a Yemeni wedding party, which is 20 people outside of the city center in a rural area by themselves. It kind of looks like a terrorist training camp from data alone. And so you see in the recreation of the world, in terms of who we are, in terms of what the knowledge of the world is, in data terms, means that you're going to get a lot of things wrong, but more importantly, you're going to actually have to recreate what is a terrorist. You're going to have to recreate what is gender. You have to recreate what is social class. You have to recreate what is sexuality. You have to recreate race. All of these things, which are really important and politicized, when you move them into a digital world, they take a different valence. They take a different identity. For example, I'm a 65-year-old woman in terms of Google. Obviously, I'm not. But Google thinks of me because I purchase and I surf like a 65-year-old woman, which I take as a great compliment. And also, Facebook thinks I'm Latino. It thinks I'm Hispanic. And that's because I probably like tango music. And they think that's sufficient enough to think of him as Hispanic. And
it's sometimes your behavior. We're going to reach, let's say, singularity.
I don't think we are.
That an algorithm can track your behavior.
I think there's
99%.
I think 99% yes. That's a really good point. In statistical forms, there's no 100% certainty. Tomorrow, in every 5 seconds, we can assess, is the world going to be here? Of course it is, but statistically you can't be sure, so you have to say it's 99.999%. I think that's the way that we can understand the difference. An algorithm might be very, very, very good, and it might be extraordinarily efficacious and most likely get the right answer, but there's always going to be, much like everything, a probable difference or something that is going to be outside of it. So notions of the singularity.
The outliers.
The outliers, precisely. You can think of outliers, or you think of just the undatifiable. How does emotions get datafied? You could try to do this with, there's Fitbits, things that try to say how happy or sad you are.
And the haptic technology
precisely.
now started advancing a lot.
Yeah. But in my book, I have this very funny thing from Face.com. It's a Israeli facial recognition company that was bought by Facebook in 2011. It's a photo of James Vanderbeek from Dawson's Creek, and he's crying. Yeah. But the algorithm thinks he's smiling and laughing because his face is like that. Yeah. And it's funny, but it also shows, how do you get something very internal to you? A sense of self, justice, ethics. How do you make those digital? How do you make those or remake those in algorithmic form? And it's really difficult, but it's also a completely different thing. Unless you ask me how I feel, you're not going to know who I am. So behaviorally, there's something to it, but even the hardened of us, don't cry, you don't cry, you still feel sad, but there's no data that says you're sad. If that makes sense. And so things have to be datafied. Things have to have some sort of connection to an algorithmic form in order to be understood. And so the book is about how that operates and how it produces a different logic to how the world works.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, thank you, John,
Of course.
for joining us. Want to add something else?
No, I'm very happy. I wish you the best of luck with everything.
Yeah, I will put a link in the comments about the event tomorrow. So if you want to meet John, you can visit the event tomorrow in the back and see his presentation and the panel discussion and a link about the book so you can find it.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.